The name of the text is The Social Construction of Bakelite Toward a Theory of Invention, and it was written by Wib E. Biker. And I believe this is just a small fraction of the big picture because he used to write a lot about the relation between three main elements that are society, science, and technology, and how they all interact. Particularly in the case of the Bakelite, in this text, he begins by talking about pre Bakelite history and specifically talking about the plastics. To give you a brief summary, he explains how the initial industries, or before even talking about industries, even in the ancient Egypt and Greece, they already had the necessity of using plastic like products. They had some resins and also amber used to create jewelry and different luxury products. With the time, these luxury products started to evolve because um, they started having a bigger demand, but the natural resources could not cope with this big demand because the natural resources were finite, but the demand was unlimited. So here we start talking about some authors like Parks, Hyatt, and Hill. Particularly, they started developing new patterns of artificial or a more resistant, good looking, and secure sort of plastic that with the time, if we think about it, this could be compared to the cell phone industry. Particularly, I believe that they have been competing one against the other for quite a long time, and on trying to find new ways to resolve the issues made or the mistakes made by their fellow competitors. So I think it's very interesting how in this particular fragment, not everyone is trying to do the same thing because they are trying to cope with different necessities. For instance, Hyatt actually started working in this industry because he wanted to win a $10,000 prize that was offered for someone who could develop a type of plastic that could be used in billiard balls and that could replace the existing really expensive materials that had been used for so long. And with the time and with his discoveries, he created his very own company with his brother, in which they started using these discoveries into dental plates industry that initially was not as successful because it would release a very weird flavor that people didn't like, and the texture of these plates was not the appropriate one. So we will see how different, I would say, areas of society would be benefited by something indirectly. So the creation of new plastics, for instance. With the time, then, the new challenge was to create some kind of alternative. And in these matters, different scientists, chemicals, and researchers started to work with no success. They wanted to replace the existing materials, celluloid based material, but they were not as successful. The reason was, I believe they were working all within the same frame, technological frame, and it was someone else, the person who was able to actually resolve this issue and create a new material that would cope with those necessities. Actually, the problem with this artifact celluloid was finally resolved by Bakeland, the creator or the father of Bakelite. And it was partly because he was working on a different type of frame. He was also working like his fellow researchers loved Delaire, Smith, and Story on that frame, but also at the same time he was even more involved, or he had a higher inclusion in another technological frame, which was the electrochemical engineering, that gave him a different perspective of what he wanted to work on or what he wanted to do. He distinguished then three phases and the production of the existing material, and within these three phases, the exposure to high temperatures and pressure, and he was able to start molding the material for the first time. However, I think it's really interesting how, now talking about Bakelite particularly, it is a social construction somehow, because it was not only him working on it, but he used what previous authors had learned in his very own research, and his first customers helped him also a lot on becoming perhaps a little more, let's say, plural in the development of the invention. Consistently, industries like the radio industry and the automobile industries were benefited, and also benefited the Bakelite company, because they used them. The radio industry, for instance, could use Bakelites because they were easy to start mounting different electronic components into the creation of new radios and more sophisticated technology. And the automobile industry was also benefited because they were able to use Bakelites, particularly because they were resistant to high temperatures and to other chemical substances and oils that were involved in this industry. So it's really nice to see how they also later on helped develop the Bakelite at a different rate, because thanks to the use of Bakelite in their industries, they started helping develop these technology. So we cannot talk about only one technological frame, and we cannot talk about only one social group, and in the development of, I would say, any of the devices or any of the technology or artifacts we currently have. But we have to talk about them as social constructions, and I think that's the biggest thing that I will take from the text. That, as Baker mentioned, not only in this text but in his writings in general, that we have to talk about technology together with science, together with society, because it is a social construction and it is a teamwork, any invention that we can talk about in current times. So, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you have a chance to read it too and to find and get into your very own conclusions. Thanks.